Welcome to Shape by Faith, where we shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. My guest today is Denise Weimer. She writes historical and contemporary romance and romantic suspense, mostly set in her home state of Georgia. She's authored a dozen traditionally published novels and a number of novellas. As a managing editor for the historical imprints of Lighthouse Publishing of the Carolinas, she also helps others reach their publishing dreams. Denise holds a journalism degree with a minor in history from Asbury University, and you can find her at her website at Denise, it's Denise, Weimer, Weimer, books.com, and Facebook and Twitter. And Denise is going to let us know at the end of the program just the various ways you can connect with her and find her books. Denise, welcome to Shape by Faith.
Thank you, Theresa. I'm overjoyed to be here with you and the listeners today.
Well, I'm so glad we got connected. And gosh, I love hearing people's journeys and, you know, how God has written their story and how you are writing stories for other people to read. And I love that it's clean reading. I have your, I have your Georgia Gold series here. The thing is, I had ordered 4 and I do not have the first one yet, but I have book 2, 3, and 4. So I'm like, I need the first one, I believe, before I get started. I know. I'm going to have to check on that again, but I'm excited. My husband actually loves history. So he will also enjoy these. I want to ask you, when did your writing journey begin?
Well, I would say probably in middle school around age 11. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and I grew up in the country outside of Atlanta. I was an only child, and my parents were big history lovers. So when we would take our vacations, we would travel all over the Southeast, and we would go to neat little towns and historic sites and living history villages. And I was just one of those unique children that really loved that. I got excited about the smell of boxwood hedges, and I was curious about what kind of columns were on the front of these houses.
Wow.
And I just had this really active imagination, and I would start to wonder what kind of people lived in these places and what were their lives like back in time. So I began to bring some spiral-bound notebooks with me, and even in the back seat, I would start writing these stories out. And my mom was really my first cheerleader for my writing journey. And she would have me read these long, rambling stories to her, and she encouraged me to keep going.
Wow. God, you know what, Denise? God had to have placed that in you, obviously. You know, your love for history and yay, Mom. I mean, aren't moms wonderful? How there are sounding boards, and dads as well, and grandparents and other people that are involved in our life. All right. Did you have a favorite town you visited as a child?
I wouldn't say a favorite town. We just went to so many, but I do remember we went a little bit outside our normal area. We went to Connors Prairie. I think that was in Indiana. And that was probably the first living history town that I had ever been to, where there were craftspeople, you know, doing the activities and interpreting daily life. And that just really opened my eyes and helped me to picture what it would have been like. So that one stayed with me.
Okay. Did you read any books when you were younger, you know, that had a historical theme, and what were they?
Oh, yeah. My parents started me on Eugenia Price pretty young.
Oh, wow.
She was very well known, especially in this region, for her Savannah series. So I started with that style, and I'd say it greatly influenced the Georgia Gold series that you got some of those books. They're kind of in the Eugenia Price style. And of course, I read Gone with the Wind, and also read Chronicles of Narnia and the Little House on the Prairie books, and all the good things that a young lady should be reading.
So you're
like history.
Right. So your parents really encouraged your reading. Is that correct?
Oh, they did. Yes. In fact, Mom would sit and read to me for many years, and that was just a treasured time for the two of us.
All right, let's talk about your journalism training. How has that helped you? Because you're also an editor and a writer.
Yes. Well, I actually never worked for a newspaper, which is kind of funny because back then I was told that's something I would have to do before I wrote a book. But that's not true. I did both magazine writing and book writing without ever writing for a newspaper. But I would still say that the training was helpful. I think it really helped me organize my thoughts. We have to have scenes or conversations flow in a manner that's logical that the reader can follow.
Right.
And I think it helped with that. And it also helped me focus on the most important aspects of a story, the who, what, when, where, why, and how.
Yes.
To just kind of make sure we zero in on what's most important and cut the fluff.
Mm-hmm.
So it was still helpful in that way.
Our conversations, because gosh, sometimes I find those are hard for me personally to write. What about you? So does that come naturally to you? Did you have to develop that?
No, because when I was quite young, I actually would kind of hear the conversations in my head when I would picture a scene, just like an audio tape playing, and I would know what the characters would say. And since then, I really like to use conversations to insert historical tidbits. It's important not to dump the setting on the reader, but to insert it gradually and continually so they feel like they're really, back in that time period. So I will use an action beat, as a character's talking, they'll be doing something that shows us something about the history or maybe what they're wearing or what it smelled like, that sort of thing.
Well, that is definitely a gifting, Denise. What you do, it is. That's a gift directly from the Lord. Did you realize that as a child did you know anything about giftings that God would give us? Did you think about that at all?
Again, I would say my parents really taught me that. My dad was a pastor and my mom was very active in women's ministry. So yes, she identified early and just said, I really think that this is your gifting from the Lord. It's so clear. And I never really doubted it. I pretty much knew from middle school on that I was meant to be a writer. I could never picture myself doing anything else, although I did for a little time consider doing architecture and preservation, going into historic preservation and restoration. Mm-hmm. But I knew I'd have to live in specific places if I did that. So I went with writing.
All right. Before becoming a published author, what were you doing and when did you first get published?
Well, I worked in public relations for a little bit right out of college, and then I did some desktop publishing and magazine writing. And I started doing that as my husband and I were starting our family. We have 2 girls, and I knew I wanted to stay home with them, so that enabled me to work from home. And you asked, when did I first get published?
Yes.
It was probably in my late 20s. I was actually almost published right out of college. I had a Civil War trilogy I'd written and queried publishers myself back then. And it had gone to my sample chapters had gone to the final review committee of my dream publisher. And I got a call from them and I thought, oh, this is it. But they were actually calling to tell me that they had just committed to a series from a gentleman, it was too similar and they couldn't publish it, but that I should keep writing. And at that point, I knew that I had looked everywhere I knew to look. And so I set it aside and concentrated on other work and on starting the family. Yes. And then I would say it was when my younger daughter was starting to nap regularly and then starting preschool that I realized it might be time to try again. And that's when I wrote my first novella, something small that I thought I could manage at that point.
Can you describe to our listening audience what a novella is, like how many words and what that is?
Yeah. A shorter novel, if it's in a collection, it may be anywhere from like 15 to 30,000 words. Redeeming Grace was a little bit longer. I'm calling it a novella. It was really more of a short novel. I can't remember the word count on it, but a typical novel is going to be 70 to 90,000 words. So it's going to fall somewhere between that, 40 or 50,000 maybe.
Okay. How long does that take you to write, Denise?
It just really depends on if it's historical or contemporary, because naturally a historical will require more research. Although occasionally for my contemporary romances, I've had a character who has a unique occupation and that's, taken some extra time to research. So it just depends.
Okay. We're going to take a really quick break here. So when we come back, we're going to hear more from Denise Weimer. So everyone stay tuned. Welcome back to Shaped by Faith. We shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. My guest is Denise Weimer. She writes historical and contemporary romance and romantic suspense, mostly set in her home state of Georgia. And we're going to talk about some of your newer books, Denise. I would love to hear about them. But before we get into that, I want to ask, where do you receive your inspiration while you're developing your characters, your storyline, your setting?
Right. Well, I would say that I tend to draw most inspiration from the little known history and sometimes even the legends of my state. Most of my books I've written have been set in Georgia, a few outside. But I like to find something that people don't know a whole lot about that's kind of surprising, and then weave a story around it. That's kind of what I did with The Witness Tree, which is one of my more recent historicals. It's set in Northwest Georgia. It was then Cherokee territory. And it's about a school for the children of Cherokee chiefs that was established by Moravian missionaries. Oh, wow. And they came down from Salem, North Carolina. So this story features a marriage of convenience that takes place. So that's your romance. And then the young bride is not only to teach the students, but she is also given an assignment that ends up being dangerous to them during that time period, which is around 1805. But when I found out about the Moravians and the Cherokees, I thought, well, who even knows, that all that happened? Most people don't even know who the Moravians were. True. So it made for fascinating research, some difficult research, and a good storyline.
Wow. I mean, there has to be a lot of research involved with the books that you write.
Yeah. That one had a lot.
Wow. So how long would it take you to research about the book that you just mentioned? And how much time's involved, and as far as your resources, talk about that.
How I go about kind of framing the story?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it just varies a lot. Of course, I've gotten faster at the research and also knowing when to stop researching and start writing. For that Georgia Gold series that you got, I researched a full year before I ever started writing, and I continued throughout. To be fair, that's 4 books, and it covered about 40 years.
Wow.
So that required more, but I'm down to my quickest one is the April release that I have coming out, Bent Tree Bride. And I did the whole thing in 6 weeks. That's the fastest ever. Yes.
You are getting quicker.
I am, but I really didn't skimp on the research. I still had a 45-page timeline, and I watched all kinds of videos online, and we went to a living history in Alabama to research it. So I just learned how to do it faster, I guess.
Well, tell us about that book, the one that's coming out in April, Bent Tree Bride.
Okay. It is about, well, let me see. Sorry, I need a second.
No, you're good.
It is set, like I said, in Alabama, and it's about a lieutenant in the Cherokee Regiment who falls in love with his colonel's daughter. He's been assigned to guard her and the son while they are in hostile Creek territory. Again, little known history. A lot of people aren't aware that during the War of 1812, there was a portion of that war that was fought in what is now Alabama. And the Creek Indians split, and a number of them, called the Red Sticks, fought with the British, or were allied to the British, didn't actually fight with them. And the Cherokees allied to the Americans. So they were fighting their own brethren in a sense.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of the action happened there in 1813 and 1814, really the frontier time period.
Okay. When we've talked about you developing your characters, but do you ever weave in some personal stories or people's stories into your books, or people and kind of develop them into a character?
I really try not to do that. I feel like I would need permission to do that from another person. And then for myself, I think I feel, most authors are fairly private people. Yes. And there's already so much of myself in my writing and out there on the internet that what I do actually is not so much write my own story, but maybe incorporate aspects of my own personality into my characters.
Mm-hmm.
Also, another thing I'll do, I really like to include themes in my books, even the books that maybe aren't as deeply spiritual in nature. I have some that tend more toward clean reads, especially my contemporary romances, but I still like to include themes that really entail things that I've learned, life lessons, from my own life.
That's
and
good.
That might be a theme like, forgiveness or overcoming insecurity or perfectionism or something like that.
Oh, we need to hear about that. We do. Okay.
Yeah.
What genre of books and authors do you enjoy reading?
I really do like reading historical romance as well. And I prefer right now those set on the frontier in the eastern colonial states or during the federal time period, the early years of America's history.
Mm-hmm.
I just enjoy those because of the challenges that the early settlers had to face, whether it be from nature or other people, whatever. There's so much drama built into the setting that you don't have to work very hard to come up with an exciting plot.
Yes, my goodness gracious. But you sure do have to know your history to write the way you're writing. I mean, that's fascinating. How does your faith impact your writing style? And I know you have clean books, but could you go into that a little bit more?
Well, I touched on it a little bit, when I was talking about the themes I like to include. So I do that with my more contemporary or lighter novels. I just kind of work a theme, and I really like to show a character who goes through a growth arc during the journey. In the beginning, you might see them as a little flawed, or maybe they have a wound from something that's happened in their past and they need healing from it. So throughout the challenges that come their way in the story, they learn to rely on God and rely on family and friends to give them strength and to get through those trials and really to face what it is in their past or, whatever weakness they might have in their personality that needs rounding out. And, eventually by the end of the book, you see some transformation and a lot of growth. I like to do that a lot. I do have some books that are more deeply spiritual. My Restoration trilogy is the series that I wrote after the Georgia Gold series when I was still with my initial publisher. And it is dual time period, and it has much deeper spiritual themes of healing in it. So it just depends on the book, whatever story I think God is laying on my heart or what opportunity I have at that moment.
Do you ever get stressed out as a writer, or you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to write here? Does that ever happen to you?
Oh, yeah. I literally just finished chapter 2 of a new contemporary this morning, and I was stressing about it because I had started my research. It's going to be called Winter Wish, and it's about a female glassblower who kind of has a second start in the little mountain town of Blue Ridge, Georgia. I've written a couple that are called Fall Flip and Spring Splash. I really like seasonal romances, so this is going to be another one of those. But I just was kind of stuck, and I couldn't get the feel for the story. And I thought, well, goodness, what is wrong? But finally, once I got a little chunk of time, I was able to sit down and get it going. I'm very thankful. Well, hopefully I can keep going.
Well, and you will. And I wanted our listeners to hear that. So if they're writing and they get stuck, that they just need to keep going and don't quit.
Right.
Just keep it going. So what's been the most challenging part of getting a book published?
Well, initially it was just having somebody who was willing to take a chance on me as a new author. And that's still challenging. I actually started with a smaller regional publisher with those first 2 series, and that worked out great. A lot of people will self-publish. That's also an option that works really well for a lot of my friends. But anytime you do want to try to transfer to a larger publisher, you're still often going to face challenges. They want a large social media following, and a lot of times they still are just more comfortable working with authors they've previously worked with. So just breaking into that can be challenging. Another way I found to kind of do that is to do the novellas in collection with other authors. that works well as an option.
Okay. We're going to take another break. I can't believe that time went by so fast. So we're going to take another break, and we're going to be right back and hear more from Denise Weimer. Everyone stay tuned. Welcome back to Shaped by Faith, where we shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. Denise Weimer writes historical and contemporary romance and romantic suspense, and they're mostly set in her home state of Georgia. And she's been sharing with us how she develops her writing and her newest book, Bent Tree Bride, and we're going to hear her read from that. But let's have a little bit of fun. Denise, what do you like to do for fun, and do you have a hobby?
Well, I did have a very unique hobby I'll mention because it affected my writing. When I was growing up and a young lady, I liked to go to living history events, and I thought that would inspire my writing, and it really did. It kind of gave me that first person immersion into history. And I ended up leading a vintage dance group for a number of years, and we performed all over the state and had a lot of fun. But then as my book career started to grow and my girls started to go to swim meets every weekend, I kind of had to put that to the side. And, now I'm focusing more on the editing and the writing. And so I just I still like to go to historical sites. I still like to go to cute little towns and explore the boutiques and the coffee shops, especially with my mom and my daughters. I like to walk my dog at the park with my husband, and lots of good things.
Wow, that is vintage dance group. Wow. I mean, that would be
unique.
So much fun. Yes. Okay. So why don't you share with us the setting of your reading and tell us about that. And we'd love to hear you read something from your book.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So this is, again, Bent Tree Bride. It is now available for pre-order, and it will release April 13th. So if you click to pre-order, you'll get a copy on or before that date. But in this little excerpt I'll share, we're in Sam's point of view. He's the hero of Bent Tree Bride. He's a half Cherokee lieutenant in the Cherokee Regiment, and he has been assigned to guard his colonel's daughter and son while they're at Fort Strother in Creek Territory. And Susanna and George, her brother, have talked Sam into demonstrating tomahawk and knife throwing at the practice range. Oh, wow. So Susanna speaks first. What is your other requirement? What? Sam snatched his gaze from Susanna's lips to her eyes. Her cheeks, already rosy in the cold, darkened another shade. For letting me throw your little bitty knife. My little bitty knife? Indignation laced his repetition of her words. Let there be no doubt this dagger could gut a man. Very well. Your lethal weapon, although you seem to think I can't handle the larger one, much less your tomahawk. Why do you care about throwing a knife or a tomahawk or any weapon when your father would order his entire regiment to fight to protect you? Susanna released a gusty sigh. Because as much as I would like to think he will always be here, he may not. What if I lose him in battle? What if this lung sickness returns when he goes on the next campaign and Polly can't save him? Then what will I have left? For one, Dr. Hawkins would rush to the rescue, although Sam would be wiser to bite his tongue than suggest that when she was this betwaddled. Thankfully, she continued without pausing to solicit answers. I should at least be able to defend myself. The lessons at finishing school may have taught me how to speak French and snare a husband, but they're useless out here. You know he will send you home at the first opportunity. As much as the thought pained him, Fort Strother would seem a cheerless place without Susanna Moore. But that's just it. I shouldn't have to leave. She balled her hands into fists at her sides. I want to show him I am as strong as Polly, that I can survive, and not only survive, but be helpful on the frontier. I don't have to have Cherokee blood to do that, do I? The yearning for acceptance in Susanna's words echoed a similar longing in Sam's heart. She searched his eyes as she had earlier, but this time he didn't close his soul. If she needed strength and he could help give it to her, what cause had he to deny her? That's the end of that little bit.
Oh, gosh, I want to hear more. Okay, I'm going to order your book. Everyone order her book. Where can we find you, Denise?
My website, which is thedeniseweimerbooks.com. I'm very active on Facebook, also on Twitter, BookBubs, and Goodreads. And I would love to connect with you on my website. There's also a sign up for my once a month author email where I like to give sneak peeks and behind the scenes and giveaways and all kinds of good things.
Love that. Denise, you have been lovely to chat with. I can't wait to hear more about your books. And so I'm going to have you come on Shaped by Faith, maybe in another, 6-7 months and see what you're doing. Okay.
Thank you so much for
You're
having me
welcome.
and everybody for joining us today.
Absolutely. And thank you for listening. I'm Theresa Rowe. Everyone have a blessed day. Bye.